I work at Starbucks. I have worked there for a very long time. I'm a shift supervisor, and this means I get to touch a lot of money. I work every weekday morning, and the highlight of my morning is putting together the daily deposit and going to the bank, because then I get about 45 minutes before my lunch where I don't need to stand in my store. On Monday morning I was counting the deposit and entering it into the system when I came across something unusual. First, let me explain this to you. My store balances the registers to $200. Every time a barista is finished with their till, a supervisor counts it and inserts everything over $200 into a numbered plastic drop bag, which is recorded into a log and dropped into the safe. The closing supervisor didn't enter a barista's cash register into our cash management log. That was boring. I'm sorry. My job is boring. So what happened? My computer program tells me that I should have 6 drop bags in front of me, but there are only 5. The logbook only has 5. $300 has evaporated. Tuesday wasn't any better. Following the mass panic between me, my boss, and the shift team, everybody was on high alert. 6 years of doing the exact same thing every morning, and I have never seen a loss like this. You can imagine my dismay then when the exact same thing happened during the Tuesday deposit. Another missing drop bag, this time recorded in the logbook, but nobody working the previous night actually remembered putting it in the safe. Days pass. The next Tuesday my coworker Leanne is on her period. I'm telling you this because she kept her pads in a giant wallet and took the wallet out of her locker upstairs and left it on the back desk while she rushed to the washroom. Also on the desk was our store's laptop and Leanne's phone. Our milk order arrived in the midst of a rush, and Leanne wandered into the back store to go look at her phone. But her phone wasn't there, nor her wallet. She searched for it everywhere but couldn't find it. Our coworker Alicia began to help her search, reassuring her that it was probably just a dumb prank by the guys working. I'll tell you now that I wasn't here for this part because it was so busy, and I also wasn't the supervisor on duty. While all this happened, I was making frappuccinos. Leanne told Delphine, the supervisor, that her phone and wallet were missing from the back desk. Delphine went to have a look. We were 2 people on the floor with a crap load of customers. Delphine noticed the laptop was missing, and the back desk was in a total state of disarray. Leanne said it was like that before she started looking for a phone. Leanne used Alicia's phone for Find My iPhone. The phone was still in the building. Leanne, Alicia, and Delphine came out and quietly told us they think somebody jacked their stuff from the back room. But because the door is literally on the floor, how could anybody have come in without being seen? I'll tell you, through the garbage room. In the back room there is a door that leads to the service hallway connecting my store to the other stores. At the end of the hall is a garbage room, and we leave the garbage door open because it smells terrible. So Delphine, Alicia, and Leanne went into the hall to see that our back door was not locked. They also saw that the stairway down to the basement was unlocked. Alicia opened the door and saw that the lights in the basement were on. They heard a noise. Footsteps. Leanne trotted down the steps, and at the bottom she saw a man. The man had her giant blue Kate Spade wallet sticking out of his back pocket. Her phone was probably there too. The store laptop was on the floor. Leanne said she began to panic and asked him not to move and who he was. He said to her, "The girl in the green apron, I work at Starbucks." "Okay, sir, same." He started walking towards her. She told him not to move and started to cry. He pushed her, and apparently quite hard, and zoomed up the stairs straight past Delph and Alicia into the garbage room. Leanne ran very quickly behind him and grabbed his shirt, managed to get both her phone and wallet when they fell out of his pants. Unsurprisingly, the man got away. For somebody to know this building this well was pretty unusual. Our own manager didn't even know we had a basement. It's going to be a few weeks before we find out what the cameras recorded on the days the money went missing and when this dude poked through our back store. But we all agree that his familiarity with the service hall and garbage room and basement setup was suspicious. When I try and put the pieces together, considering everything from employee theft to accidentally throwing the money in the garbage, the idea that an intruder waited for an opportunity and took it makes the most sense. We're lucky nobody was really hurt, but afraid the man might come back. For now, all we can do is make sure our back door is always firmly locked, and that our phones are safely in our pockets away from danger. So last year my sister was working a local Starbucks along this string of shops. There was a grocery store and about 10 other small stores in the shopping center. One day my sister came home and began to tell us about this really creepy guy who kept coming in at the same time every night. She's 16 and really small, about 5 feet 1 inch. She's also really skinny, and doesn't know how to defend herself either. After the first few encounters, he began to call her Goldilocks or Cutie Pie. She claimed that this guy was in his late 20s or early 30s, so this was completely inappropriate and just plain gross. This happened for a few months, and they would tell my sister to go to the back area when he would come in. The guy then would ask them where she was when he didn't see her serving there. Many of my parents decided to go visit her Starbucks around the time he came in a few times, and sure enough, every night around the same time, the guy wore a similar outfit every day. A white t-shirt with blue jeans. We visited her for a few days, and on one of those days we decided to see how far away he lived, and if he was a local where to keep an eye out. This may have not been a completely appropriate thing to do, but my dad is really protective, so I was up for it. We got in the car after the guy's usual visit. He had also purchased kitty litter at the grocery store, so he was a cat guy and followed out his car. This is where it gets really weird. We were in the car for about 45 minutes when we crossed the state line into the neighboring state. He lived in a not-so-nice area, not to mention it was Maryland, and he drove for another 10 minutes until he reached his run-down apartment complex, Fallen Ghetto. This guy was traveling close to an hour to see my sister every day. After this, we told her to talk to her co-workers about it, and they told the guy that he wasn't allowed to make contact with my sister anymore because she was a minor. It never came back to that Starbucks again. My sister actually ended up moving to a closer one too in the end, so the creepy guy in blue jeans and white shirt at the Starbucks wouldn't be able to see her. I work in downtown Seattle, and every day I take this train, the light rail, to and from work at around 3 p.m. I usually walk from my house to Starbucks, hang out there for a while, and walk for about 10 minutes to the train. By last week I had been following the same routine for over 2 months, and had never noticed anything strange. I don't usually pay attention to my surroundings as I'm either listening to music, doing something on my phone, reading, or doing all of that at once. Anyway, last week I was walking from Starbucks to the train like I normally do, and I simply didn't notice anything. My train hadn't arrived yet, so I sat down on a bench and kept reading something on my phone. I noticed that someone had taken the seat next to me, but I wasn't fazed. Living in Seattle, I get used to people invading my personal space. I glance up and see a man, probably late 20s, staring at me with a massive smile on his face. I gave a quick smile back and continued doing whatever it was I was doing. I then hear him say hello with a slight accent, something from the Middle East I think, and so to be polite I say hello back, but I clearly am not interested in talking. He continues staring and smiling at me, and then says, "Have you seen me in Starbucks before?" I look up and shake my head and say no. He sounds sad, and then he stops talking for a moment, looking dejected. But now he decides to use his extremely creepy pickup line. "I watch you every day from Starbucks, and today I follow you all the way to the train," saying this with a massive smile on his face. At this point I didn't know exactly what to do, so I just looked at him and then put my headphones back in, hoping that he would screw off. He taps me on the shoulder and says, "I come all this way, give me your number." His smile started to fade at this point, praying that the train will arrive soon that I can escape. I finally said no, and he gave me a truly angry face and said, "Why no?" I gave him the traditional, "I have a boyfriend" excuse, except I actually did. So when he said, "You serious, or are you just," I quickly showed him my phone background and my boyfriend, and I thought he would give up at that point, but no. Instead he starts stroking my hair and saying, "You lovely smell," with that massive smile like he just completely didn't hear what I had just said. Luckily the train showed up right at that moment, and I was relieved that he didn't follow me on. If he had been there when I came back at 11 p.m., I don't know what I would have done, but it wouldn't have ended well. Needless to say, I transferred to a new Starbucks shortly after that. This particular incident took place over the spring of 2011, when I was about 15 or 16. My friends and I frequented the local Starbucks, and we had a great time there. Most of the employees were really great. One of them, David, was kind of odd. I didn't think much of him, and I always gave him the benefit of the doubt, even when my other friends called him creepy. My friends and I went there quite often, and like usual people, we had to go to the bathroom every once in a while. One day we were there for a long time, probably almost 4 hours, and we noticed David going to the bathroom quite often. We didn't think about it until about a month later when we saw an article online. Apparently David had put a camera in the bathroom and had been taking footage of young women and putting it on his computer. He would go to the bathroom about every hour and collect and download the footage. The police aren't sure if he uploaded them onto the internet or shared them at all. Unluckily for him, I'm severely lactose intolerant, and many of those milk-fed lattes probably didn't make the most attractive photos. He was arrested, and I haven't heard about him since. Looking back on this memory, I feel badly. Women should stick together. I was always raised to believe, and girls should always help other girls. But one day I was in Barnes & Noble's Starbucks coffee shop trying to finish some homework. I was facing my sister, whose back was against the wall, and I had my back to the rest of the store. The only other people in the cafe was this older man in his 50s or 60s and this teenage girl with blue hair. They were sitting at different tables, but the man had his feet in the aisle and was less than an arm's length from this child. Yes, teens are not kids, but she barely looked 15. In his hand was his camera. He was attempting to show the screen to her, all the while saying, "I love how your face catches the light in this one. You such a lovely bone structure." I was mildly sick, so I couldn't catch the drift of what was happening. I kept catching the girl's eyes, but I sadly didn't read the message she was sending. Suddenly a Taekwondo van pulled up outside, and she bolted from the table to the door and into the van. It was then that it dawned on me that this man was a complete stranger and had taken several photos of her without her knowledge or consent. I wish I could say I had the ovaries to go up to him and demand he delete those photos of her, as they clearly made her uncomfortable. But I went back to my hydraulics, and he left soon afterwards. I spent my first couple of years after high school just kind of wandering around and trying to figure out what to do next. I worked at a lot of lame jobs, and I regularly signed up late for classes at a couple different community college campuses. This meant I spent a lot of time driving anywhere between a half hour to an hour to get where I needed to go, and a lot of my commute took me to parts of the city and the suburbs that I had never seen before. Back then everything felt way too big and complicated, and I was totally lost, but I loved coffee. I would always make time in my schedule to stop at Starbucks, get coffee, and read a little bit. I think it was because, no matter where I was, one of these shops always felt familiar. This was sort of my way of coping with growing up. Once, when I was waiting for a friend to get off of work, I stopped at a Starbucks I knew. When I first walked in, I noticed a girl who seemed really familiar. This would happen pretty often, and at the time I figured I recognized her from campus, work, or even high school. She sort of smiled when she saw me. But other than that, we didn't interact. This location had a lot of space. There was a large lobby with 5 or 6 tables, a bar-style counter facing the windows, and an outside eating area, and even a few of those stuffed chairs. The girl I had first noticed sat at the table closest to the door, and I chose a smaller table by one of the windows, away from the other customers, but clearly visible by most. I probably bought a mocha. When I sat down, I must have spread all of my stuff out because I remember the table being kind of cluttered. I like to take notes when I read, even just for fun, so I'll have a notebook, a pen, my book, and also my wallet. I don't like to sit on it and my phone on the table. I'm pretty single-minded, so when I read I can get really into the zone. I'll lay my book on the table so that I can hunch over my notebook and take notes without losing my place on the page. Sometimes I'll lose track of my surroundings. This time, when I eventually looked up, I realized that someone was watching me. Another guy had taken the table across from mine. He looked about my age with yellowish hair. I remember he was wearing jeans, which seemed weird because it was still basically summer and it was hot out. He didn't have any drink, and it didn't seem like he was going to order one. Once he saw that I had his attention, he started talking to me. He asked me small stuff like what my name was, where I was from, what I was reading. I was immediately creeped out, but I had always been inherently introverted, and at that time I was trying to span out and meet new people, so I talked to him. Eventually he moved over to my table and talked about how he was new to the area. He asked where I was going after this, and when I told him, he said he was going in the same direction. He said that since he was new, he didn't know any of the street names, but that he could find his way by landmarks and stuff. As hard as I was trying to be social, for some reason I didn't feel comfortable giving him a ride. I told him I was planning on staying at the coffee shop for a couple more hours because I was waiting for a friend. This seemed to bother him because he abruptly changed the subject, but he eventually brought it back up. We went on like this for maybe a half an hour. He would ask for a ride again, or ask which car was mine, and I would make up some excuse, and then he would talk about something else for a couple of minutes. Eventually we ran out of other stuff to talk about, so he just started looking at my stuff more. He looked at my notes, asked to borrow my pen, and at one point he even picked up my wallet and started looking through it. Back then, I was really non-confrontational, so rather than demand my stuff back, I just started to slowly pack up whatever he wasn't messing with. Eventually, he decided he needed to go to the restroom, so I started putting everything away. At this point, that girl I had recognized from earlier came over and asked if I was okay. I said I was, but I probably looked really uncomfortable. She told me that I shouldn't give him a ride and that I should just ask him to leave me alone. She actually even stayed with me until he came back out and told him that he should leave me alone. He kind of acted shocked and offended, but then he left the store. At that point I probably should have just left myself, but I stayed. I talked to the girl a little bit and went back to reading. After a while, a lady in her mid-30s came in. She wore a low-cut blue dress and a lot of makeup. Her hair was styled. She sat down across from me and asked if my name was Dean. I told her yes, and she asked if I could give that guy a ride. She actually offered to pay me $20 to give him a ride. I politely refused and got up to leave, but when I got to the door I looked outside and saw that the guy was waiting by my car. I hadn't actually identified it to him, and this was large store parking lot. I looked back at the lady, and she was just watching me. Rather than go confront him, I sat across from the girl I knew in the spot where I could watch this car. I didn't want to admit how nervous I was, so I didn't call the cops or attempt to bring any attention to my situation. Instead, I proceeded to read while I watched the guy. Eventually, a security guard came up and asked him to move along. After that, I basically ran out to my car and drove straight home, making sure no one was following me. I don't know what any of that was about, but I'm really thankful for that one familiar face. One evening as I'm on my computer, just browsing Facebook, I happened to get a message notification. Thinking it's one of my friends or family members, as I have my profile blocked from people I don't know so they can't message me, I click on the notification to open up the message. It's from an elderly man who doesn't live in the same town as me. This will become important later. He tells me I'm very beautiful. I just reply with a thanks and leave it at that. I should have never even replied because he immediately replies with, "Are you single?" When clearly in my profile picture there is my boyfriend of 3 years, and I'm embracing, kind of obvious you'd think anyway, I reply with no. He replies with shame. I end up blocking him and going to bed. The next morning I'm opening, and I'm alone. It's dark out as it's only 5 a.m. We don't open for another hour. When I hear, "Hey, you're looking beautiful as ever this morning," I turn around expecting one of the coworkers from my store that my kiosk is placed in to be just messing with me. But to my horror, the elderly man was there. He lives in a town that is a whole 1.5 hours away from me. The fact that he drove all that way just to see me terrified me. I went and told my manager about it, and he told me to go to the back room, and he would come get me when the guy was gone. It took a while, but my manager finally came and got me. The guy, after I disappeared, ended up walking the whole store multiple times trying to find me, and even asking associates if they had seen me walking around, and that he needed to talk to me. My manager quickly told the gentleman that he was worrying his employees, and that would be best if he left before he had to call the cops. Needless to say, he hasn't spoken to me, but I do occasionally see him lurking about the store. Once last summer, my friends and I went to a Starbucks right by our houses. We just wanted to relax, drink our coffee, and have a good time. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. After we ordered our drinks, and we sat on the couches and just hung out, all of a sudden some older guy, he was probably in his 40s or 50s, walked in, paused, looked around, and then stared at us for a couple of seconds. I was unaware he did this until my friend Brandy pointed it out later on. He came up to us and shouted, "High five." I refused to give him a high five, but Megan and Brandy awkwardly high-fived him. The guy stood in front of us and started asking us a lot of questions. The conversation went something like this. "So how are you doing?" "Good." There was silence. Brandy and Megan and I all start awkwardly laughing. "So what school do you go to?" Megan creeped out. I don't think we want to tell you that," the old guy replies, giving Megan a creepy smile and looking directly at me. "Is she a bad girl?" I start laughing uncontrollably. I know I shouldn't have laughed, but I'm kind of an awkward person sometimes, and I honestly didn't know what to do at that moment. He then stares at us for a little bit and then walks towards the counter. Brandy, Megan, and I start whispering about what just happened, and we're definitely creeped out by this guy. I asked them why they gave him a high five, and they said that they thought he knew one of us. We certainly did not know him. All of a sudden Megan said that he was staring at us, and when I looked up he was standing by the counter, waiting for his drink and staring straight at us with this disgusting smirk. At that moment all three of us got up and left. We went to a Smith's that was right next door and waited for a little bit until we felt safe to go outside. After loitering around Smith's for about 10 to 15 minutes, we walked outside and didn't see him. We went back to Starbucks and hung out for a little bit until Megan got picked up by her mom and left. Now, since we live close to Starbucks, Brandy and I started walking home. It was during the afternoon, so there were plenty of people out, but we still felt incredibly uncomfortable. We kept looking over our shoulders just to make sure that this old guy wasn't following us. Thankfully, we safely got to my house and hung out there until my dad got home. My dad used to be a cop, and we told him all about the old creep and how he made us uncomfortable. My dad kind of laughed it off. The guy hadn't really done anything illegal except make us super uncomfortable. After that, we never saw him again, thank God. However, later on, Brandy told me how when he walked into Starbucks, he scanned the cafe and how he picked the three of us out from the rest of the coffee lovers there. Also, when he originally asked, "Is she a bad girl?" I thought he was talking about my friend Megan, but it turns out that he was talking about me. This just made me even more creeped out than before. However, I still go to that Starbucks, and again, I have not seen him. I'm glad I haven't run into him, but I am worried that maybe he is doing the same thing, or maybe even worse to other teenage girls. I can only hope not. Just a little background. On the day this happened, I was with my girlfriend. I am also female, and we are both just under 5 foot tall and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Point is, we're tiny. But anyways, on to the story. On this particular day, it had been raining outside and seemed like the perfect weather to stay curled up inside watching movies. One problem, no snacks. So my girlfriend and I decided to walk to the mini-mart just down the street. As we were walking, we noticed there was a man trailing some distance behind us, and he is muttering to himself, talking under his breath. At first we paid him no mind. There are a fairly large number of homeless people in our area, and sadly many have mental illnesses. We continued walking and noticed he was still behind us. Weird. We get inside the store and start picking out snacks, and I notice he is standing right outside the store peering in, staring directly at us. At this point I am a little worried, but when we check out he is no longer there, so I brush it off. Further down the street from the store there is a Starbucks, so we decide to stop and get some coffee before walking back to the house. The entire walk I felt like we were being watched, and just couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. We walk into Starbucks and order our drinks and sit down to wait. I look out the window, and there's the same guy again. He is across the street, but he is staring straight at us. At this point I'm freaking out and trying to tell my girl this creep has followed us, but she insists it's nothing. The next time I look up, the guy is inside the Starbucks and staring at us with a look I can only describe as predatory and hungry. I'm terrified at this point. We grab our drinks and are getting ready to head out when he yells out, "Hey, there you are." Heads turn to see what the commotion is about, and he calmly says, "That's my niece and daughter." I told them not to go anywhere without telling me. My girlfriend decides to react at this point and grabs my hand, and we get out of there. We speed walk down the street, hoping to put some distance between us before he can react. I turn back around, and he's still following us. He's not chasing after us, he's sauntering in a way and has a menacing look on his face. This guy was pretty built and close to 6 foot. There was no way we could take him if it came down to it. We do the only thing that we can think of and start running. This is when he starts chasing us and screaming out, "Don't go. Don't you want to play?" The road back to my girlfriend's house is pretty desolate with no houses for a few more blocks, and we're running away from the only area where there would be people. At this point he is gaining on us, and I think that at any minute he will catch up to us, and that would be the end. The guy is almost 10 feet behind us when most miraculously, we see a car coming down the street. We start running towards it, waving our hands and yelling, trying to get this car to stop. It does, and we frantically start telling the driver that this guy is following us. The driver steps out, and the would-be creep stops dead in his tracks. He stands protectively in front of us and says something along the lines of, "Just walk away, buddy. You don't want any trouble." The creep stares us down, and then gives us the creepiest smile I have ever seen. Shrugs his shoulders and walks back up the street. The driver insists on seeing us home and trails behind us the rest of the walk until he sees we are safely inside. Thinking back, we should have called the cops, but we were too scared to think straight. Thank God for good Samaritans. I shudder to think as to what could have happened if that car had not stopped, or that guy had actually caught up to us. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r.letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community. And be sure to check out my Choose Your Own Path horror game on the iOS and Android App Store, and grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 or more a month on Patreon. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. I'm kind of a coffee junkie, so when Starbucks opened in my neighborhood, I made it a ritual to visit the place every morning. My office was on the way, so I would stop by the Starbucks drive-thru, get my coffee, and head to work. The Starbucks was pretty busy in the morning, but me being a regular never had to wait more than 5 minutes. But it felt excruciatingly long the last time I visited Starbucks. In fact, now I don't go near Starbucks. I don't even like coffee anymore. The smell of coffee suffocates the air around me. It reminds me of him and how he made my life miserable. One day, I was waiting in the queue at the Starbucks drive-thru on a rainy morning. Even though the weather was bad, people were still out on the streets. Everyone was rushing to their workplaces. By the time I reached the window, people had started to get impatient, honking their horns, making loud noises. I took out some cash and without looking at the window said, "My usual Liam, thanks." But when no one took the money from my hand or even uttered a single word, I got confused. I turned my head to the drive-thru window and saw a completely new face. It was a man in his late 40s. He had a pointy face with a goatee at the end. I don't know why, but he reminded me of a goat. He was looking at me, an angry frown. Sorry, where's Liam? Liam's gone. Do you want me to take your order? I ordered and waited with a grumpy face. He was rude, but I wasn't in any mood to start a brawl early morning. I took my coffee and drove away. The very next day, I went to meet a client at Starbucks. I was waiting inside the shop when I smelled a strong odor of sweat mixed with burnt coffee. Before I could turn around, that same barista from the drive-thru appeared in front of me. "Have you ordered already?" No, I'm waiting for someone." "Is that your boyfriend?" "What the? That's none of your business, dude." Seeing me raise my voice, a few customers looked at my table. The barista smiled and said in a low, creepy voice, "I'm John. I hope you have a wonderful day." Left. What a jackass. First he was rude to me, and now he's asking about my love life. The client arrived, and our conversation lasted for an hour. The entire time I could feel eyes on me, like someone was watching me from the counter. Every time I looked there, I could see someone hiding behind the kitchen wall. The entire night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see John staring at me without blinking. The smile on his face was huge. I woke up late the next morning and had to rush to the office. As much as I hated the idea of going to Starbucks, my body screamed for a cup of coffee. By 11:30, I was in the queue of the Starbucks drive-thru. I wanted to keep it short this time. When I arrived at the window, John was already standing there. "Got late, huh? One large cappuccino, make it quick." I patiently waited and disregarded anything that came out of his mouth. Once he handed me my coffee, I went to pay him. He took the money and said, "Did you party a lot last night? Is that why you're late to work today?" I put my car in drive when he suddenly inserted half of his body into my car, almost hunching over my face. "If you stop answering me, I'll make sure you never talk. None of your boyfriends will be able to save you." And that pushed me over the edge. I splashed the hot coffee on his face and gave him a tight slap, buzzing his left eardrum. He backed away, and I started to scream, "Who the hell do you think you are? Are you nuts? I want to talk to the manager. Which stupid-ass employed this moron?" Chaos took place. The Starbucks manager came out, and I was pulled aside. John stood there quietly, but I kept on screaming, "I'm going to call 911. I will sue all of you. Just wait." The manager stopped me and insulted John in front of everyone. He then fired him then and there. I was offered a month of free coffee as a gesture of apology. When I was driving away, I could see John standing on the side of the street. He was waving at me. Bloody creep. Before getting into the elevator, I walked to the bin in the corner to dump the coffee cup. And that's when I noticed it. The words, "Secret Message," was written on the cup with a black marker. A straight line was drawn to the foot of the cup. Whoever wrote those words also struck out a few more words on the cup. And now it said, "Careful, you're extremely hot." I called the cops and informed them about John, the way he was behaving. I feared he might turn out to be some crazy stalker. I stayed with one of my friends that night. Around 5 a.m. in the morning, I got a call from the local sheriff, and he gave me the horrible news. John snuck up inside the manager's apartment and slit his throat with a pocket knife. He was arrested from his house after the surveillance footage caught him coming out of the manager's house in the middle of the night. I felt responsible for making the manager a target of a deranged psychopath, but there's no way I would have guessed the heights of John's madness. I'm glad that he couldn't harm me, and for the rest of his life, he will rot in jail. The story you just saw is loosely based on this creepy incident uploaded from a TikTok account. The owner of the account is a 20-year-old woman who went to the local Starbucks for her usual morning coffee. But once she made it back to her car, she noticed the barista had written something on the cup. As she checked, her stomach dropped. The Starbucks barista had left a creepy note for her. On the top of the cup, the Starbucks employee had written "secret message." He'd also drawn an arrow down to the small print on the back of the cup. On there, he had blacked out certain words in the sentence so that it read, "Careful, you're extremely hot." Even though the woman laughed at first, getting awkward with this sudden attention, but quickly she let out her worries, mentioning that she's never going back to that Starbucks again. She received mixed opinions after sharing the photos of the cup. Some said she wrote it herself, while others said she needs to be careful of a stalker in process. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. This happened in the summer after I graduated high school. My local Starbucks was hiring, and I needed a job. They put me on the night shift, working from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. One night, around 1 a.m., I was sitting alone in the shop. The streets were pretty clear except for the occasional car passing through the complex. I was taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi and watching videos on my phone when I heard a small bang behind me. A stack of cups was lying on the floor. I picked them up and went back to my browsing. Again, 5 minutes later, the cups fell down. I figured the air from the AC knocked over the cups. I groan as I go to pick them up and wonder if I should turn the AC off. As I was in the middle of cleaning up the mess, a bang came from the back kitchen area. That's where we make the desserts. I was confused and slightly freaked out. I entered the kitchen, swinging the door closed behind me. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, except the Starbucks poster that we had hanging in the kitchen had fallen down. I rolled it up and sat it on the counter, making a mental note to tell the manager that it fell down the next shift. I went over to the thermostat to turn off the AC since the draft was knocking everything around. I turned it off, and the next 30 minutes were silent. I was getting tired, so I made myself a coffee. I was sipping on my coffee browsing Facebook when my headset beeped. That was strange, since we barely ever had any business at this time of night, but not unheard of. "Welcome to Starbucks. How would you like your order?" I looked up at the monitor, but nothing was there. That same thing happened several times, up to the point of 2.30. My headset kept beeping every 2 minutes, but when I looked at the camera, there was nobody there. A few seconds later, the coffee machine malfunctioned, spewing foam and coffee everywhere. I freaked out and turned it off immediately. I remember turning it off after making my coffee, so I had no idea how this happened. I needed to use the restroom, so I went quickly in case any customers came. Coming back, I saw Starbucks cups stacked in the shape of a pyramid on the counter. That was extremely weird, since they obviously couldn't stack themselves. It was probably the teenagers, I thought. I was debating whether or not to call the cops, since they were harassing me, but I decided to wait for a little more in case they come back. I glanced down at my phone for about 10 seconds, and when I looked back up, there were cups everywhere. Stacks and stacks of cups in the shape of a pyramid. I guess around 50 to 70 stacks. I was terrified. Something was here at the shop with me, and whatever it wasn't human. I scanned the place, but there was not a trace. Not a trace of anything. I knew my boss would flip a lid if she found this, so I started unstacking them. When I finished, it was around 3.15. I just wanted my shift to be over, so I could get out of this place. Then there came the bang. It was from the kitchen again. As I stepped into the kitchen, the lights went out. I stood in the darkness, looking around. My heart was racing in fear. I didn't know what to expect. Right then, I heard a humming sound echoing. The sound was coming from the kitchen sink. I walked close to it and took my face closer to the drain pipe. Yes, the humming was coming from there. Drops of sweat crowded my forehead. Is this all real? Am I really hearing a woman's voice humming from the other side of the drain pipe? I closed one eye and tried to get a good look inside the pipe hole. Suddenly, the tap started running, but instead of water, strong, brewed hot coffee started pouring out from it. The force was so strong that the coffee overflowed the kitchen sink, dripping from the edges onto the kitchen floor. I watched in horror because it all seemed so unreal. And then the tap made a rumbling sound, like someone was stuck in it. Sprinkles of coffee came out of it, stopping its heavy flow, and then a hat squeezed out from the small tap. Yes, a giant bulbous head of a woman. Only she wasn't human. Her hair was like octopus legs. Something slimy was dripping from them. Her demonic eyes were yellow pupils on black eyeballs. I've never seen anything like this. Instead of a nose, she only had 2 nostrils, and her mouth has no lips. She had gills like a fish instead of ear. Slowly, her huge, slimy, half-human, half-fish body started coming out from the tap. The sloppy, grotesque sound echoed inside my brain as she pulled herself out of the small hole. Her jaw was hollow and had huge, sharp fangs. She made a chuckling sound from her throat, and I got up screaming. I rushed to the exit and stopped after reaching the nearest Walmart. A few people saw me and sensed my trouble. They asked me what had happened, and I took them back to the Starbucks, saying I'd seen a horrible creature coming out of the tap. But when we all went back, everything was just as it was supposed to be. No mess, no broken light, not a single drop of coffee on the kitchen sink. That humming sound was long gone as well. 10 years have passed, and I still remember every detail of her demonic face. I don't drink coffee from Starbucks because I fear that coffee is the creature's gateway to our human world. The story you just saw is loosely based on the infamous story behind the famous Starbucks logo. That image in the center of the Starbucks logo is not a mermaid. She's actually a mythological siren, a female creature that lured mariners to destruction by her unworldly singing. In Greek mythology, the sirens were dangerous yet beautiful creatures who enticed nearby sailors to shipwreck on the rocky coast and die. Starbucks got its name from the author Herman Melville's Moby Dick novel. However, the famous siren logo came to fruition after the founders discovered her image while scouring old marine books. In 1971, the original Starbucks opened in the port city of Seattle. Since coffee beans typically traveled overseas on large container ships, the founders decided to use a seductive siren logo that would lure coffee lovers to its stores. And seductive she was. The original Starbucks logo was a bare-breasted female siren with 2 serpentine tails spreading apart. Some people even claim that the Starbucks logo is cursed. By turning the original Starbucks logo upside down, you can see the image of Satan. In 2014, Starbucks got in trouble after its employees were drawing satanic pentagrams and the number 666 in the foam of coffee. Do you think the famous Starbucks logo is hiding something terrifying like this? Let us know in the comments. I work as a barista at Starbucks. I usually work the morning shifts as it brought more customers, hence more tips. One morning I was walking toward the Starbucks a couple blocks from my apartment. I noticed a woman sitting on the sidewalk in front of the door. She had a trolley bag beside her. At first I just assumed it was someone in desperate need of a coffee, but as I got closer, the dirty tattered clothes told me she was homeless. The woman was rubbing the bottom of her forearms against the concrete. Suddenly she noticed me and got up, quickly walking away. I walked up to the door and looked down at the spot where she was rubbing her forearms. The concrete was stained a dark red blood. I figured I'd wash it off with some hot water before opening the shop, so I quickly brushed it off, blaming it on addiction. After getting as much blood off the sidewalk as possible, and sanitizing the door handle of the hobo grease, I opened the shop and prepared for the morning rush. Here's your coffee. Have a nice day. I and my co-workers were in full swing at work. One after the other, customers came and we handled the usual Starbucks mugs filled with brewing hot coffee. I was so invested in my job that I didn't realize. Jesus, it was that homeless woman standing in front of me now. Her face had a disgusting smile, flashing her rotten teeth. She slammed a $10 bill on the counter and said, "Once you're done screaming like a little girl, make me coffee." I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." A flush of red covered her face. She got very angry and said, "Why? It's not about you doing anything, ma'am. It's just, I know what you're trying to say, that I'm not welcome into Starbucks because I'm homeless, because I don't look good enough to be a part of this crap store, right?" She spat on the floor of the shop, upsetting all the other customers, and I was in no mood to tolerate that. "Ma'am, if you don't leave, I'll have to call security. You can have your coffee for free, but please leave after that." Coffee for free? So now he wants to be the big guy after insulting a poor old woman. Fine, I'll show you what I can do. Saying this, she suddenly walked towards the table. She then picked up a chair and threw it on the floor, creating a huge ruckus. People started leaving the Starbucks in fear. "Somebody stop that lady." I went to grab her, but she elbowed me in the eye. It was that same bloody elbow that left a stain on the wall moments back. As much as I got hurt, I also got her blood in my eye. My co-workers helped me get up. The lady grabbed her trolley bag and while walking towards the exit said, "Now you'll know my pain." I didn't understand why she said that at the time, but the rest of the day, I served the customers with a black eye. After work, I came home and went to take a shower. I was done for the day. While washing my body with soap, I looked down at my arms and noticed some light red dots on my skin, similar to mosquito bites. No itching or burning, they were just there. After examining them for a bit, I ignored them. The next morning I woke up and walked to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, I couldn't believe it. My skin was extremely puffy and blotchy. Several areas were a deep red and felt bumpy to the touch, but the worst part was how itchy the infected areas had become. Luckily, I didn't have work that morning, so I went straight to the doctor. The doctor looked over my body and asked me several questions. She concluded that I simply had a bad case of hives. She gave me an injection to bring down the reaction. I picked up some anti-itch cream on the way home and went to bed for a nap. But as time passed, my rashes grew bigger and worse. Luckily, there was no spot on my face, so I could still go to work. I started wearing full sleeves to hide the marks. But my God, the itching. I itched all day. It felt like tiny bugs with spiky legs were crawling underneath my clothes. I would rub my arms against the counter in an attempt to secretly scratch them. When I was behind the coffee machine, I would scratch furiously at my clothes before coming out with a smile on my face and calling for the customer to pick up their drink. When there weren't any customers in the shop, I would run to the bathroom and scratch my arms and legs, chest and stomach, shoulders and back, and scrub my hands as much as possible. After a few hours, I went to the bathroom and noticed I was bleeding, with scratch marks all over my arms, chest, and stomach. The bumpy texture grew worse as well. The bumps had formed into clusters and clumps. The heat from the coffee maker was making me sweat as well, which began to irritate the blisters that were beginning to form. I began to feel delirious. I've never fainted or passed out before, but I felt like I was going to. I began to feel lightheaded. "Hey, this isn't a grande pumpkin spice latte." A customer's stern voice brought me back to my senses. "Excuse me? This is a tall." I asked for a grande. With a couple of customers, and I politely asked him to wait, and went to take back the coffee cup when I ended up screaming. Once I touched the coffee cup, a layer of my skin got stuck to it like a sticky note. The customer stepped back in disgust, and everyone stared at me like I was some freak in a scary movie. That night I was fired. The shop closed early. My manager told me that they can't compromise the hygiene of the place. The apartment where I stayed banned me from entering. Attendants don't want to live with someone who has infections all over their skin. I live on the streets now. Just like that homeless woman. My skin feels like fire ants crawling all over my body. I'm sure you've seen those photos of 30-degree burns that people get when they spill boiling water or grease on them. That's what these look like now. My hair is falling out. My teeth are starting to fall out too. I now know what that homeless woman meant when she said, "Now you'll know my pain." The story you just saw is loosely based on this footage recorded at a Starbucks outlet by a customer. The customer went to Starbucks for his usual morning coffee when he saw a woman walk into the store holding a trolley bag. She had very bad hygiene. She was screaming at one of the baristas while throwing fits of outrage all over the place. The woman screamed at the top of her lungs, shouting profanities to the certain barista. Her behavior was so shocking that everyone at the store stopped and watched her go crazy. At one point, the woman even walked to the nearby table and grabbed an empty chair. She picked up the chair and stomped it on the floor furiously, even before leaving the store. She cursed the Starbucks outlet and the barista, giving everyone trauma for life. This story was inspired by a news article revolving around a Starbucks female restroom. There's been many incidents revolving around creeps or peeping toms spying on females in public change rooms or restrooms. But either way, this story definitely takes the cake. What makes this more disturbing was how the individual who submitted this story included a reference photograph of the alleged occurrence. Please do keep this photograph in your mind, as it will be a key component to this story. It's tough being a working student. However, I didn't complain about it. After all, I got a job at Starbucks as a barista. With its dim lights and jazz music, the ambience was soothing. During break time, I would bring out my laptop and do my homework while drinking coffee. However, one day I received a disturbing DM from a random guy who we will call Chris Patterson. It was a video clip of me entering a cubicle, taking down my underwear and urinating. Based on the camera's angle, I could instantly tell that it was placed underneath the toilet seat. It was disgusting. I felt violated. I sent him a DM saying, the perverted man replied in a casual tone, saying, "I want you to be my girlfriend." It's that simple. If you don't give me what I want, I'll leak it on the internet. Nice try. Did you actually think you could blackmail me with something like that over my dead body? I replied outrageously, "Be careful what you wish for, Anna Smith." And that's how we ended our conversation on Instagram. Without a moment to lose, I contacted the police and filed a report against this maniac. A few hours later, I received a call from one of the officers saying that it was difficult to locate the suspect, since he was using a false name and a fake account on social media. However, they reassured me that they'd keep looking into it. When I arrived home, I received another call from an unknown source. I answered it anyway, and I heard the voice of a man chuckling on the other end. "Who is this?" I asked curiously, but I received no response. Instead, he snickered incessantly. I said, "Who is this?" The man on the other end of the phone harumphed, seemingly trying to contain his excitement. Moments later, he replied, "It's me, Chris. I can't stop simping. Thinking of you, baby. I sent you a little gift." "A little gift?" I confirmed, feeling a bit anxious. "Yes. Go to your porch, cupcake. You'll find something on the floor." He teased, clearly messing around with me. As soon as I stepped on the porch, I saw a Starbucks cup on the floor. When I picked it up, it had my name on it and my lipstick mark still on the cup. My heart throbbed fast as I searched my surroundings, feeling paranoid. Still on the phone, he aggressively said, "I know you called the police. I know everything about you. You don't see me, but I see you. So try doing it again. I'll visit your parents' house 15 blocks away from where you live. Then I'll kill all of you." I couldn't utter a single word out of fear. Having noticed that he had my full attention, the man instructed me to be his girlfriend for a week, doing everything a boyfriend and a girlfriend should be doing together. Hence, I did as he imposed. He coerced me to meet with him at Starbucks on my day off. As I entered the coffee shop, I noticed an old scruffy-looking man who seemed to be in his 40s. He had messy white hair and a demonic smile. Wearing denim pants, a black leather jacket, and a red turtleneck shirt, I was under the impression that he desperately wanted to look young and cool. He waved his hand at me, and I knew that he was Chris. He gestured for me to sit beside him, so that's what I did, even when I hesitated deep inside. He told me that he had already ordered us some drinks and asked if I wanted any pastries, but I shook my head in firm disapproval. "I see. Well, you don't have to be shy," he said, drooling. My body was as stiff as a wooden plank. I couldn't help but feel uneasy being next to this creep. Then moments later, he fondled my hand, and then eventually my lap. I jerked and asked him in a low tone to avoid drawing attention to us. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "What do you mean? This is what girlfriends and boyfriends do, right?" He laughed, as he scanned my body maliciously. Suddenly, he glanced at me with round, intimidating eyes and said, "Don't forget about our little agreement. If your parents aren't enough, I can also get rid of your best friends, Carla and Dana, and dump their bodies in a river." How did he know so much about me? How long had this pervert been stalking me? I fell silent and looked down at the table as he grabbed my hand and emphatically kissed me in public. In the following days, I was forced to stay at his place where I slept with him. Then, before going to bed, he would firmly tie up my hands and feet with metal chains to ensure that I wouldn't leave his side. 2 days before the end of our deal, my parents called me on the phone to visit their house for a family reunion with my aunts, uncles, and cousins. The creep heard everything and insisted that I take him along and introduce him to the family as my boyfriend. When we arrived at my parents' house, my entire family was shocked to see that I was holding hands with an old man. Mom and Dad knew my taste in men and were ultimately confused. However, to avoid disrespecting their new guest, my dad patted him on the back, while my mom invited him to the dining area, where he could enjoy a sumptuous meal. While he was busy introducing himself to my relatives, my mom gestured for me to follow her into the kitchen, where she hugged me and asked, "Honey, where did you get these bruises? And who really is this guy?" I wanted to tell her everything, but when I glanced at Chris, who was sitting comfortably on a chair, he was staring at me with menacing eyes as he fiddled with a steak knife. Without a single word spoken, I knew he was warning me about hurting my family if I said anything to my mom. So, I withdrew my initial thoughts and lied to my mom. I told her that I had an accident at work earlier that week and that Chris had nothing to do with them, while everyone was laughing in sheer bliss in the other room. I was silent and tense. 1 week eventually passed, and I was finally free. Chris kept his word, but this incident would haunt me forever. Since then, I left my job and avoided using public restrooms. Weeks later, I went to grab a coffee at the same Starbucks and saw the same creep with another woman. Give me a kiss, cupcake. You don't have to be so shy. The woman seemed just as tense as I was. When the man gazed at me, he gave me a wink. And I knew this was going to be a never-ending cycle. I feared for my family's life, and my best friend's too, forcing me to stay silent about this incident until now. Technology has reached the point where sometimes even cameras are difficult to see. Police say one was hidden attached to a toilet in the bathroom of a Starbucks. Happened the location on Outer Drive, just off the Southfield Freeway. It's the size of this pen right here. Now it's easy to hide and easy to overlook, but police say for days. It was watching people inside this Starbucks. You couldn't see it, but the person on the other end of this camera definitely can see you. October 22nd, 2012. A woman in her early 20s named Whitney suddenly vanished on her way to work at Starbucks. What concluded within the case shocked the entire nation and unfortunately ended in a brutal fatality. The next animation was inspired by this tragic event. There was a time not so long ago that my only relationship to Starbucks was that I worked there. I wasn't a fanatical customer. I wasn't the owner of a franchise. All I had to do with the coffee chain was the fact that I could be seen in the drive-through window in the dark hours of the late shift. For a long time, I thought this meant literally nothing. After all, very little business ever came through the drive-through at the hour, especially given the location I worked at, being somewhere most people consider as the middle of nowhere. Most people were just stopping by to get some caffeine, so they could continue with their overnight drives across the middle of the country. The inside was closed anyway, but I doubt most of them would have considered staying for long if it was. It wasn't an urban craft coffee house. It was just a rural Starbucks. Hi, welcome to Starbucks. How may I take your order? I'd like a grande iced caramel macchiato. With extra vanilla sweet foam, 2 pumps of caramel syrup, 2 pumps of mocha syrup with soy milk and brown sugar topping. Oh, and 2 extra shots of espresso. I never understood how people could put such diabetic abominations into their bodies and continue to function normally. And it always amused me how they seemed allergic to real cow's milk, as if it was unhealthy or something, when they were about to consume enough sugar to put a toddler into a coma. But that's beside the point. Because for all the silly sorority girls and giggling frat boys coming in to order this unholy concoction, none of them caused anybody any harm. Except, maybe, to their own pancreas. Actually, as a matter of fact, when I look back on those people now, I tend to see them as fond memories of a simpler, more innocent time in my life. More than anything, I wish I could go back to my old life of standing in that drive-thru and feeding people's addictions to caffeine and sugar. Unfortunately, there's just no way that's going to be possible. Not after what happened that night. The night began no different than any other. There was nothing in the air that suggested any of the things that were about to happen. So when the beat-up old truck rolled into the empty drive-thru without a license plate, I didn't bat an eye. The drive-thru had a couple cameras pointed toward the intercom, so we could easily remember which cars were supposed to be getting what drinks. But it wasn't meant for identifying license plates and tipping off the police about people with expired tags or whatever. For the most part, the truck looked like a textbook local, some kind of farmhand or factory worker getting roped into some late-night work and stopping in for some coffee. The man inside of it, however, was somehow even worse for wear. Hi, welcome to Starbucks. How may I take your order? Your voice sounds just perfect. What do you look like? Ha. Yeah. You'll find out when you come around to pick up your order. What would you like to drink? You guys do all those fancy coffees, right? I guess I'll get a large hot latte with 2 globs of Starbucks saliva, 2 locks of barista hair, and sir, this isn't funny. You'll have to order something on the menu, please. Oh, I'm not trying to be funny, sweetheart. I'm serious. I'll give you the biggest tip of your life if you splash some of your very own urine in my drink. I'm not putting up with this. Would you rather speak to my manager? No. To serve me. And I'd really love it if you'd serve me some of your blood with that coffee, if you don't mind. Okay, that's enough. If you don't get the hell out of here, I'm calling the cops. I dealt with some seriously rude and disrespectful customers before, but this guy certainly took the cake. I watched him drive off from the intercom, hoping that he would just be some creepy old dude playing some kind of crass joke on a college student, and that he would drive off and not stop at the window. But of course, he wasn't ready to leave yet. He screeched to a stop just outside the window, leaning out of his car door with a strangely apologetic face, pleading something with his hands together. Reluctantly, I opened the window just a crack. I'm sorry, really. I didn't mean to freak you out. You're just as perfect as you sounded. You know, you have the most beautiful blonde hair. Such long, sultry hair. Anyway, I'm sorry about all that back there. I just want a black coffee. I wasn't sure what to make of the situation. He seemed like he was just some out-of-touch old creep trying to prey on some younger women, which obviously is a terrible thing to do, but I wasn't worried about men like that. I worked at a rural Starbucks, and that was something I'd had to handle a lot of. I could handle myself around creeps like him. It wasn't worth getting reprimanded to deny him service. And how will you be paying? He held out a clenched fist while he stared at me with hungry wrinkled eyes, almost drooling over his sagging chin. I ignored his gaze and opened the window a little more to get my arm through. I held out my hand to receive the change, but when he opened his fist, there was nothing in it at all. In the same instant, he latched onto my arm with a vice grip and yanked onto my arm. He was so much stronger than I thought he could be. He pulled me right out through the window and into his car. Right as I got the time to react, just beginning my struggle against him, he struck me over the head with something like a hammer, and I blacked out. When I came to, I was bound to a table. My legs chained up to the ceiling, my clothes nowhere to be found. I realized that I was in that man's cellar when I saw him standing behind a camera on a tripod. I thought I knew what was about to happen. That I had no idea. Do you know what the Starbucks mascot looks like? No. Please just let me go. You. The mascot looks like you stupid girl. Here's something else I bet you didn't know. The mascot is a mermaid, and I'm gonna make one out of you. No. Please don't. I've been the head barista on my local Starbucks for several years now. It's an exceptionally busy location, owing to its proximity to the major university that makes up the majority of the city's population. Lots of students and professors use the interior of the Starbucks as a place to get hopped up on caffeine and grind out whatever work it is they have to do. Because of that, I'm quite used to seeing some of the same regulars come in either every day or every other day. Sometimes to stay for a while, and sometimes just stopping in for their fix, and then going on about their business elsewhere. I used to be one of those people, working on my degree on my laptop and getting addicted to caffeine in the process. But when I graduated, I found out my degree wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, which got me stuck working the evening shift full-time at one of the 10,000 Starbucks in the nation. It's not the way I wanted my life to go, but it's the only option I had. I had to support my mother. She'd been raising me on her own for most of my life. My father had walked out on us so long ago that I couldn't even remember what he looked like. But during that time, I wasn't thinking about any of that sob story stuff. I may do with a little bit of self-loathing for picking the wrong degree, which I made up for by maniacally laughing to myself about how the majority of college students I serve were making the same mistake I did. That's how I managed to handle all their disrespectful attitudes and cringeworthy entitlement. Of course, there was one customer who was different from the rest. It seemed like he was just out to get me for some reason. He was an older, fatter fella. He wore a suit every day, as if he were trying to be classy or professional. But the condition of his clothing, and of his whole body in general, made him seem like he had been quite unsuccessful in life. Everything about him was tattered, withered, worn out. He didn't fit in with the coffee shop crowd. He was too old to be a student, but also too unkempt and downtrodden to be a professor. Despite this, within a week of his first visit to the location, he identified himself as a regular, just because of his downright unhealthy addiction to caffeine. Unfortunately, his dependence on coffee was the only typical thing about him. He always came during the hours that I was holding down the front counter, and every day his order was the same. Black coffee, hot, and the largest size you have. Would you like any room for cream or sugar? No, I said black. More room for coffee. Not only would he refuse to say any of the Starbucks brand sizes, which honestly I respect, but he would also stare at me very intensely the whole time. Lots of people will watch me while I make their coffee, but mostly those people are the Karens in training who order super complicated drinks and love to be nitpicky and nasty. Pouring a cup of black coffee is literally the easiest thing I can do all day, yet this man would watch me like a hawk as I did it. And here's your coffee, sir. Expelly done, young man. Thank you. But the stares wouldn't end there. After getting his coffee, he'd waddle over to a table in a far corner, then pull a flyer out of his briefcase and begin to read it. At first this didn't seem unusual to me. Reading is a common thing to do in a coffee shop, but it didn't take me long to realize what was amiss about his particular choice of reading material. When I say flyer, I mean like a flyer you get in the mail. I'm pretty sure it was a furniture catalog or something. Whatever it was, it certainly couldn't have actually entertained anyone for more than 5 minutes. Despite that, this guy would read the flyer like it was a whole novel. I started to get suspicious after just a couple hours. I initially thought he might be some older creep coming into a college town to try and find some younger girls to prey on, which raised my guard. I'm basically the evening manager at Starbucks, so I felt it was my responsibility to make sure he didn't hurt anyone. But again, it didn't take long for me to realize there was something off about that picture. I would steal away many glances in his direction, and not once did I catch him looking at anyone else but me. I would be able to feel his eyes on me the whole time I was busy, and when I finally got a chance to look over at him, he'd just flip up the corner of the flyer to cover his eyes like it was a newspaper or something. And I also have to mention just how much coffee this man drank. I never once saw him with a cup of water, but he would come up to me at least once every single hour of my shift and ask for a refill of his coffee. Now don't get me wrong, 1 or 2, maybe even just 3 cups of coffee is normal enough. But 6, 7, even 8 cups of coffee in a single day? That's just a problem. This all went on for a couple weeks. I never really had a reason to justify kicking him out, though I certainly wanted to. That was the case until he started trying to follow me home. He got in the habit of staying in the shop until close. And when I told him he had to leave, he would walk outside rather begrudgingly, then just stand right in front of the door. He didn't harass any of my co-workers, but when I tried to leave, boy did all that caffeine come out to play. One night I got fed up and snapped at, "We're getting pretty close now, don't you think? Why don't we hang out? You sure make a mean cup of coffee. We could stay up all night and chat, you know? What if I hired you to make coffee at my place? Or I'll pay you for coffee at your place. You wouldn't mind if I came over, would you? Get away from me, man. I don't know you. Just go to the dive bars like the rest of the people your age, and leave me alone." After that night I yelled at him. Things got a little sketchier. The next day he was different. He was no longer even bothering to fake read that stupid flyer. He was just staring me down unimpeded. Even my coworker started to get freaked out by him. What was also concerning was that he had stopped drinking coffee and switched to straight espresso. In that one day, he probably had 20 shots of the stuff, which is just an inhuman amount of caffeine to consume. Just thinking about it made me a little sick. But on this day, the man had a question he wanted to ask me every time he came up to order another double shot. And every time, the question was the same. "Roger, that's your name, is it? Your name tag says so. What about your last name?" "My last name has nothing to do with coffee, sir." "Forget about it." "Oh, don't be like that, man. I'm just curious. Just tell me what's your last name." I lost track of how many times he asked me. Every time I talked to him, he got a little more unhinged and hyperactive. He started talking faster and louder, and I began to see the blood vessels in his neck and face bulge with unhealthy pressure. His eyes turned bloodshot and began to overdilate. "Oh, come on, man. It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything. Just tell me your last name." "Fine. I'll tell you if you just shut up. My last name's Walker. Happy? Well, isn't that funny? That's my last name." He collapsed to the floor very suddenly, in the middle of speaking, never finishing his sentence because his mouth was spasming and full of foam. And then the heart attack took him. It seemed pretty obvious that the caffeine overdose had contributed to it, but that alone wasn't it. They called an ambulance, and they came and identified the man as Jonathan Walker. My heart sunk all the way down to my stomach. I have very fleeting memories of my father from childhood. However, he abandoned my mom and I 15 years ago. He was estranged for longer than I could remember, though he looked very different all those years later. I knew in my heart that this guy was him. He tried to reconnect with me in his own strange and maladjusted way, and I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I knew that amount of caffeine was enough to give someone a heart attack, but up until I realized he was my father, I hadn't cared about his well-being. I'd go back and change it if I could, but what's done is done.